Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you happen to be, anywhere around the world. I hope you're having a great time, and I hope you're ready for something a little bit different, because for the next 15 minutes, we're going to talk about management, specifically people management as opposed to process management. And I'm going to share what it means to be a great manager. For those of you who don't know, people management is one of the domains of business agility, and is absolutely vital. It is a vital skill, a vital characteristic of an agile organization, an organization that is resilient and adaptable, that is customer-centric, if not customer-obsessed, and filled with engaged and empowered, purpose-driven employees. But first, I'm going to tell you a story, a real story, about a bad manager. And I'm going to use the one example who can't object, me. For those who don't know, my name is Evan Leybourn. I am the CEO and co-founder of the Business Agility Institute, a global community and research organization dedicated to inspiring and providing information and guidance towards what it means to be an agile organization, or more specifically regarding business agility. But while my current role gives me the opportunity to see what great management looks like in thousands of companies around the world, I'm going to go back in time to well before the Institute, to around 2008. So 2008 was the first year that I became an executive. Before then, I had run teams, I had run projects, I'd even run my own small company. But towards the end of 2008, with the global financial crisis happening around the world, I unfortunately had to close down my small business, which is a story for another day. And I got given the opportunity to do something new. I took the chance and I became an executive director in the Australian Public Service. This was my first time running a section and sharing accountability for a $35 million budget, an initiative across multiple government department agencies. This was an enormous opportunity and an enormous responsibility. And when I went for the interview and when they offered me the job, I got the job because I was a subject matter expert. I could clearly articulate the delivery strategy. I knew what would be required to be successful operationally in this role. But I think most of all, I got the role because I was confident, because I came across as someone who could do the job. But you know what? As I quickly learnt, I wasn't a great manager. There's a concept that gets spoken about in government, and actually most organizations to be fair, called the Peter Principle. And this is the observation that people will generally rise to their level of incompetence. If you want to know more about the principle, check out the book. I think it's about the 1970s, the book by the same name, The Peter Principle. Suffice to say that this was me. I might have been a good team leader, I might have been a good project manager, and I may have been a good small business owner, but I was not a good manager. I was missing those core skills that could have made me great. And this was my arrogance, the assumption that based on my experience, I would automatically be a great manager. And I'm not alone. In my current role in the Business Agility Institute, I have the opportunity to speak to thousands of managers across hundreds of organizations all across the world. And I see the same pattern time and time again. This idea that management is an intrinsic skill that we have, that if you're good at your job, right, that you can automatically be a good, or if not great, manager. That without training, we can be a great manager if only someone would give us a chance. But for some reason, it's only management that we do this to. Nobody would look at a doctor or a nurse or an engineer or a builder or even a barista making coffee and think, I can do that job. We recognize that there is skills and training and experience that goes into that role. Yet we look at our boss and we think, I can do that job. And in some cases, you know what? I can do it better. The worst part of it is maybe you can, right? Maybe you can do a better job than your current boss, because if he or she got their job, got into this role through confidence and has reached their level in competence, it won't be hard to do a better job. But there's a big difference between doing a better job and doing a good job. And if we look at some of the stats, there was a study by Career Builder that showed that 58% of managers said they didn't receive any management training. So this tells us that this isn't just the fault of these confident managers. This is also the fault of the companies that promote them or that hire them. They fall into the same assumption that management is an intrinsic skill. And this is this false journey towards management. And this behavior, both by the companies and the managers, leads to some of the worst anti-patterns of management. Micromanagement, for example, where a manager, probably uncomfortable with their own role, uncomfortable with trusting their team, needs to know everything that someone is doing, needs to have their hands in, because if they lose that deep understanding of what's going on, somehow they won't be quite as good a manager. This assumption that we need to always be there, we call that presenteeism. The idea that we have to be visible in the office, visible in business all the time. Otherwise, for some reason, we are not a good manager. In Silicon Valley, or more accurately, coming out of Silicon Valley, there's this concept called hustle porn. The idea that long working hours are to be glorified, are to be admired, that a manager who must work 10, 12, 14 hours a day, they leave the office at 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. and somehow if they leave early, heaven forbid if a manager leaves at 5 p.m. Right? So, actually no, one more, even worse, meetings. Don't we all love meetings, right? And what better way for a manager who sort of subconsciously knows they aren't necessarily doing a great job, right, to hide by filling their day with endless meetings where nothing ever really gets done or no decision ever really gets made. Or worse, decisions get made not by a manager, but just by the group, right? And it's all this abdication of responsibility, abdication of management responsibility. And I would call each of these anti-patterns a subconscious management avoidance technique, right? Subconscious, because I would say most managers don't actually think they're bad managers, or at least the ones who are bad, right? Most managers would think they're doing a decent job, but they're sort of subconsciously avoiding doing the hard work of management because they're somewhat afraid of what will happen if they make the wrong decision, because they're out of their depth. And all of these anti-patterns are designed so that the managers never have to face their incompetence. But the worst thing, the absolutely worst thing about this is what happens to good managers. These anti-patterns and the confidence behind them have been so well established, they're so ubiquitous, that good managers feel like they have to act in this way as well. And managers who don't act in this way feel like there's a concept called Imposter Syndrome. Right? They feel that if they're not doing this, then somehow they're not a real manager, or they're not a good manager. And this is a real shame, because those aren't the behaviors of good managers, right? And the good managers are being led astray. But the good news is this is something that can be learnt. Management is a skill, and like all skills, you can learn it, whether through formal training, through self-directed learning, by following great authors or thought leaders, or my favorite, building or joining a network, a cohort of peers, and learning from each other, right? Seeing and surrounding yourself by great managers and seeing how they operate, how they work, and using them as inspiration. These days, I spend my time leading a research organization and promoting good management practices and business agility around the world. And based on our research, right, let's answer the question, what does good management look like? I will also add, management in modern organization is shifting in context as well. Companies are moving away from this top-down command and control style structure. And so good management becomes more about influence and persuasion than it does around direction and instruction. And so based on our research, we've identified 5 skills that distinguish great managers from everyone else. The first skill is delegation, the skill of delegation, specifically delegating outcomes as opposed to delegating outputs or tasks. So we know that teams that can take ownership and are also held to account, because ownership and accountability go hand in hand. Teams that take ownership of their outcomes have both higher engagement scores, and they reduce effort on wasted activities or wasted effort on things that are not needed. Right? We know from our research on business agility that employee engagement, right, correlates very strongly between business agility and good people management. And we actually know that mature agile organizations have a 24% improvement on their employee engagement scores over the general business population. So outcome delegation, as compared to work or output delegation, means that your teams are empowered to decide what work they're going to do, how to do it, when to pivot, how to change, that kind of thing. Right? Now, this always has to be in alignment with the broader business objectives and the business outcomes, but the teams, the people doing the work, these are the ones who are closest to the customer. These are the ones with the greatest operational knowledge. So we want to reach a point where, as Peter Drucker puts it, everyone sees themselves as a manager and accepts for themselves the full burden of what is basically managerial responsibility. Responsibility for their own job and work group, for their contribution to the performance and results of the entire organization, and for the social tasks of the work community. So let's move on. The second skill that a manager needs to develop is the skill of instilling purpose. Now, there's been a lot of research on the importance of defining and communicating purpose to both employee engagement and customer impact. And this is a prerequisite to the skill of delegation. Good managers need to actively and consistently invest time in clarifying and communicating both organizational and operational vision. This is also key to creating alignment between teams across different divisions or across different departments, so that you and I know how our work aligns to the goals of the organizations. Some stats: we know that 30% of organizations cite failure to coordinate across units as the single greatest challenge they are facing their ability to execute their company strategy. So, on the topic of strategy, the third skill, the skill of strategic agility. Now, COVID-19 has made strategic agility, which is sometimes called emergent strategy or adaptive strategy. This is a prerequisite skill for all managers in 2020. It's not enough anymore to design your business strategy once a year. Businesses are now forced to make strategic decisions every few weeks. And it's those managers who have the skill to both set and communicate, going back to the previous skill as well, this adaptive strategy, and empower their teams, going back to the first skill, empower their teams to identify opportunities to execute on this strategy. These are the managers who are successful in 2020. So let's move on to the fourth skill, the skill of people development. People development requires a strong sense of empathy. A good manager is someone who uses that empathy and actively invests time and effort in understanding the whole person, right? Not just the skills they need to do their job, but the complementary skills and the behaviors that are needed for this person to be the best possible version of themselves. And people development is good, obviously, for the work that is being done, but it's also good in terms of reducing staff turnover. Global studies are reporting that it's 79% of people who quit their jobs cite lack of appreciation for their reason, as the reason for their leaving. It also increases employee satisfaction, right? And again, managers account for at least 70% of the variance in employee engagement scores across business units. And lastly, it improves overall productivity, right? People development, right, helps create better work products and faster work products, right? And this goes also to, by the way, to building trust. A HBR study revealed that 58% of people say they would trust strangers more than their own boss. So let's go to the last skill, the skill of continuous learning. We know from our research that a culture of continuous improvement and continuous learning is one of the top 3 predictive indicators for business agility. And this has been in both in the 2019 and 2020 business agility reports. A good manager will inculcate a culture of learning, experimentation, and feedback across their teams. And this will help the teams know both what to do and, more importantly, how to do it. Now, if you want to know what happened to me back in 2008, well, it took a great manager above me to point out my arrogance and my limitations. And while it wasn't straight away, by the time I was receptive to the feedback, I listened, I learned, and I got better. So now I have learned what it takes for me, certainly, to become a good manager and to have equal measures of confidence and empathy and competence. 2 out of 3 were not enough. And now that I'm running a community and research organization, I am learning what it means to be a good manager all over again in a completely different context. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this, and please reach out if you have any questions. Have a wonderful day.